Well, hey, Bible Love listeners, so glad to be back with you. Today and next week, we have the pleasure of hosting the Reverend Dr. Alexis Carter Thomas. Alexis, since the last time you were with us, that doctor part has come in, and we will talk about that in just a minute. But the first thing I wanted to do is there is a prayer in the Book of Common Prayer for clergy and people. And Alexis has been a clergy member for a long time, but as she moves into this next role as her PhD is completed, I thought we would pray for you in this way. So, Almighty and everlasting God, for whom cometh every good and perfect gift, send down upon our bishops and other clergy and upon the congregations committed to their charge the helpful spirit of thy grace, and that they may truly please thee. Pour upon them the continual dew of thy blessing. Grant this, O Lord, for the honor of our advocate and mediator, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
So, Alexis, tell us what has changed for you in the last year.
In the last year, well, this time last year, I was deep in research mode. And I was also adjunct professor. And so my life looked like a lot of reading and writing. And so I finished my Doctor of Ministry at Drew Theological in Madison, New Jersey, with a concentration in women's religious leadership. I had the gift of journeying with a dynamic cohort of women clergy who really have been like sweet community to me in the season of COVID and transition. And so I really enjoyed our time together and learning together, the collaboration that happened, and having conversation partners or getting to read sermons for my colleagues who are serving in full-time roles, who are preaching every week, getting to read their sermons. So it's been a gift. But yeah, I'm reading more. I'm still reading a lot, but I'm not writing papers and trying to synthesize or communicate it. I'm just reading for the joy of it. And so in the last year, I've spent more time gardening and on my porch. Well, in the last few months since graduation in May, I've spent more time gardening, time with family, and just doing a lot of reflection about how intense the last year was and getting to breathe and pray and discern next steps. So thank you. Thank you for the
Well,
prayer.
I'm so proud of you. Listeners, Alexis is my very, very dear friend. It has been an honor and a privilege to walk with her through this as something that she wanted, but also something God has called her in to do, to receive this PhD. And I'm just really proud of you and so happy for you and excited to see where God calls you next, wherever that. So, what we're doing, listeners, is we have asked Alexis to talk to us. We are in the book of Ecclesiastes. And if you live in Greenwood, I've got to give like a big shout out to this. So, in the month of September, on Wednesday nights from 5:30 to 7, please join us at the Church of the Resurrection for dinner and for a conversation about the book of Ecclesiastes with Alexis. She's going to be our guest speaker, and I'm just thrilled about that. So, what we thought we would do is kind of go 1 through 7, and then 8 through 12. So, this is going to be a 2-part series. You're going to get to hear from Alexis 2 weeks in a row. Yay, you listeners. And I'm excited about that. And of course, Dr. Tony did the overview. So it's always good to like hear different people's thoughts and perspectives on this. I think when it comes to Ecclesiastes, and I know that Alexis will talk about this, our mind goes right to chapter 3 and that verse that we know so well, a time for everything. But there's a lot more to this book of the Bible. So Alexis, help us think about this first verses or chapters 1 through 7.
Oh, thank you, Mary Balfour. Thank you, Alan. Thank you for the invitation. I love Bible Love, and I'm so glad it's still going because I was like one of the first guests early on, and I feel like that was somewhat like feels like a long time ago. And so thank you for the gift of getting to share with the people who entrust you to share these words. And so thank you, Ecclesiastes, today. So I'm going to jump in. And since we have 2 weeks, we'll kind of move a little slower and get to go deeper into the passages. So thankful to Dr. Tony, who's doing the overview. There will be some overlap, but it's all good and good reminders because Ecclesiastes is a little different from other books of the Bible. It's found in what we call wisdom literature with Job and Proverbs. But what makes Ecclesiastes different is that it pushes back against what we know or early people knew as biblical wisdom. It's not your typical wisdom. Proverbs fits more the traditional wisdom. If this, then this. If you're righteous, then you will prosper. If fools, folly, there will be destruction. Ecclesiastes, not quite the same. And so Ecclesiastes, the Hebrew name is Kohelet, which, as someone who's taught Hebrew Bible, that's often how I refer to it. Kohelet is the preacher, and it's the word we see in Ecclesiastes 1:1, the words of the preacher. Kohelet, it comes from the verb kahal, to gather, to assemble. So it's preacher is biblical scholars would say that's like a jump to more modern words. That preacher was not really the word in the early context they would have used, but it would have been someone like a council person, maybe someone from the assembly. And so Kohelet, as we talk, I will speak of Kohelet as the like chief person in the text who is doing the experiments, who is talking about his experiments with wisdom and life and vanity. And so Kohelet will be the actual person I will use. And then Ecclesiastes I will use as kind of the overarching piece of the book.
I interrupt
So
you.
yes, please
Question real
jump in.
quick. So I like to use my grandmother's Bible, which is the Good
Mhm.
News Bible. It's today's English version. And they use the word philosopher. Do you think that, I mean, I know these are all their own interpretations, but does that feel, I'm trying to think of a word, teacher,
Yeah.
prophet, philosopher. And so I just noticed they said the book of Ecclesiastes contains the thoughts of the philosopher, a man who reflected deeply on
Mm.
how short and contradictory human life is, with its mysterious injustice and frustrations, and concluded that life is useless. So I think the reason I'm asking that question is because we love that chapter 3, but it actually has some stuff that's kind of sticky and hard. So do you think that word philosopher is a fit in your opinion?
Yeah. Yeah, no, good point, Mary Balfour. I think a lot of scholars would say that's closer. It's actually a better word than preacher, um, based on what we know about philosophy and anyone who's had a philosophy class. It's that the kind of content of life, of existential life, of meaning, and whether it's the poetry of this text or the narratives, we get some philosophy about the philosopher talking about the meaning of life or the meaninglessness of life. So some would say yes, philosopher is a good translation of that term. So thank you. So we open the book with some poetry, and we have some framing of poetry in the book. Part of how it's set up, as Mary Balfour said, we'll divide it into 2 weeks, but we have inclusio, we have some opening and ending, and then some context in the middle that Kohelet, the philosopher or the teacher, is sharing more about his exploits and his experiments. And so it's framed by this well-known kind of vanity of vanities. I'm using the New Revised Standard Version today. The son of David, that's actually a good place to start because I think it helps give context. And often when we see preacher, philosopher, teacher, son of David, king in Jerusalem, most thoughts go to Solomon. There is debate about this. Some would say because of what we know about Solomon and this gift of wisdom, Ecclesiastes fits what Solomon might have done. The problem with that is this text is thought to be have written later, kind of post-exilic in the sense of like post-exile of Israelites, and the Solomon's people and the people who came after him the children's children, generations trying to make sense of their own religion and their God. And so it's thought to be later, but specifically there's some literary devices in here and language that was not used early. That's closer to the Hellenistic or the Greek period. So it's thought to be, I'm not great at dating, but like third, fourth century BC. So like other books, it's thought that the writer used Solomon as used the name or used an allusion to Solomon to get, the weight of the book and hope. But it made it into the canon, which is a lot of people, there's a lot of debate about there. Debate about some books, but specifically this of because of its content, like it's not the most hopeful book. The tone is cynical, a little bit satirical. And so there was a lot of debate of, is this scripture? It's little different views of God and traditional wisdom. So
isn't that always interesting too, Alexis? Like what actually is put in the canon, right? When it's not always these things of hope, glass half full person over here, it's interesting why the people who are putting together the Bible felt like this was important. But I do think it's important to remember that life is not always sunshine and rain, butterflies, that there are really tough moments. And so maybe that was part of, the thought when the canon was being put together.
yes, yes, yes. There are really tough moments. And I do think I kind of find it intriguing and fascinating when there are pieces like this in the canon that push back against the traditional wisdom of biblical writers, but also the traditional wisdom of contemporary life. And I find Ecclesiastes actually, some of Kohelet's words more in line probably with some of our contemporary ideas around like what comes from our lives. So the sense of vanities, verse 2 says the preacher, vanity of vanities, all is vanity. So we're going to get this idea of vanity, which isn't in our traditional sense. Vanity often is associated with pride, where not so much in this sense. The word vanity actually it means similar to breath or vapor. So this fleeting, very fleeting reality. So not vanity in the sense of pride, but vanity, can be associated with that. But more vanity, I want people to think about like vapor, this fleeting sense of life, that it's all vanity of vanities, all of vanity. What does man gain by the toil at which he toils under the sun? A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. And it goes on in this poetic form to say in verse 9 of chapter 1, what has been is what will be, and what has been done is what will be done, and there is nothing new under the sun. And so we have this philosopher preacher saying like, I've noticed that their life is fleeting, and what really do humans gain by their labor, by their work? So these are two key things. I think we get at vanity, the sense of it's meaningless, vapor, like emptiness, some scholars would say, to like toil. I want to hold those two key themes throughout the text. So life can be meaningless and toil. Like, what do we get for our labor? What does it mean that generations toil and they come and go? And we'll get later in the text where we find out Kohelet's like, and then someone else enjoys your toil. Like, you work so hard and then like you die and then you're forgotten. Like this is a huge overarching theme. So it's not just that life's a vapor, it doesn't matter, but it's like, let's look at life. You work really hard to accumulate things, read lots of books, get a new degree, and yet at the end of the day, I will die, I will return to dust, and these will be passed on. Alexis will be forgotten somewhere in the generations to come. Maybe someone will write about me in a history book. But the truth is, like, Kohelet's like, it's all vain. What do you think about that, Mary Balfour? I'll pause there.
I think it's true. Alan and our friend Janie talked about this a little when 2 weeks ago when I was gone, and I was gone because my grandmother died. And when someone dies, we think a lot about their life in that moment. And especially like you're writing a eulogy or you're writing a sermon, whatever. And so in that moment, you think about all the things they did, but then like life goes on, right? And I even see this like in this grief group that we have at Resurrection, people's
Mm,
lives keep going, and like you're still missing this person that was really part of it. And so like, do the people that life keeps going on, is that just vague? But I don't know. Is that just this sense of that's how life is? Or I mean, I don't think people are like saying, oh, they're gone, let's just forget them. I don't mean that, but I do think that's just how it goes, right? And I said, so there is like some wisdom in that, I think, of also like, how do we hold up this life we've had? How do we do the best we can? But also to know that we're just like a little small part of it. Like there's so much more that will come. It also makes me think about when we were in England and Scotland and touring all these cathedrals and thinking about all the people that built these cathedrals, knowing like they would never see the fruition of it. They were doing it for someone else. It wasn't about them. It was like, what can I do in my lifetime that will help, not to be remembered, but to help the future, and I was really amazed by that, to be building and doing something that you're never going to know
mm.
what the outcome is, right? That takes a lot of strength and courage, you know. I wish,
Yes.
but and I don't know, it's just interesting. I've been thinking about life and death a lot with the death of my grandmother, and what are the impressions we want to make, or do we just want to be like, we had a life and it was good, and as the writer says, it's move on, and that was a part of time, maybe is a way to say that.
Yes. Yes to the smallness of our life. I think perspective, right? Like I read Ecclesiastes and I think like, ooh, this could be like feeling what's the word? It could very much feel fatalistic or depressing of like, oh, this is all there is. But I think there's hope here, which we'll talk more about next week. But I think there's hope in the smallness of our life, the smallness of our lives in the ways that when we are intentional about living well, which we see much of our New Testament text, right? About how that there's purpose.
Yes.
Yeah, there's purpose in how we live now, and that it is problematic to think about, well, it doesn't matter. Well, poverty's just going to be here. You said we'll always have the poor, so why do something? Like it's also problematic. But in Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, the text that we will read will show Kohelet does not believe there is an afterlife. And so when there is not a hope of an afterlife, things can be pretty dim. Life can be the sense of vapor of life is really short, whether someone's lived a few days or 99 years, right? Life feels so short in the perspective of eternity. And then when there isn't this thought of eternity or resurrection, then it feels even shorter, right? Like if there if I did not believe in this hope of resurrection, I would think like, yeah, it's all vanity. Like, what's the point?
Well, and I think you make such a good point. I think we need to just stop there 1 second in the thought of like remembering we are not to the resurrection yet. Like we haven't gotten to the cross, to Jesus on, or as Dr. Tony likes to say, on this side of Jesus where we are. And when this was written, there was so much going on in life that there may not have felt like much hope. Can I get you to skip, just for the interest of time, because I want to make sure we talk about this, to chapter 3, because this is very famous to people, right? Songs have been written about it. I can't help but think about the movie Footloose when they were talking about dancing, and everybody in the Bible was like, you shouldn't dance, you shouldn't dance. And this is
Yeah.
the verse that Kevin, whatever his name is fleeting, it's leaving my mind right now, that he comes up and says, there's a time, there's a season, there's a time to dance, there's a time to mourn, there's a time to be joyful. So talk to me about this particular Uh,
Yes. Okay, let's keep it moving. I want to highlight at the end of one, what's really important is we have this opening, and some would say it's the narrator, and then Kohelet picks up at 112 when we get to the I statement, the first person. I, the preacher, have been king over Israel and Jerusalem. I applied my heart. We have these experiments in chapter 2. So, which is one of my favorite parts. Like chapter 2 opens, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. And it goes on to what we call, scholars call experiments. Like he's trying out things. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure. Um, in verse 6 of chapter 2, I made myself pools from which to water the forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me. And then what he gets at verse 11. Then I considered all that my hands had done and the toil I had expended in doing it. And behold, all was vanity and a striving after wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun. So the sense I've tried it, I indulged in the greatest things of life and the wickedness of life. I planted vineyards, gardens, parks. I had fruits, pools, all of these things, and I still arrived at it's all vapor. It's all
yeah,
fleeting. There's nothing to come of it. Even wisdom. So as we move to 3, looks at like, I mean, it's the key, a key verse of 217. So I hated life because what is done under the sun was grievous to me, for all is vanity and a striving after wind. I hated all my toil in which I toil under the sun, seeing that I must leave it to the man who will come after me. The sense of vanity and toil. We work, it doesn't really last, right? And so
and that
ends with
he tried it. He tried it. It's not like he was just made these statements. He tried these things.
yes, which is a point, a key point of the philosopher, right? Like I've tried these things and I've come back to tell you it's still like vanity and it's still like striving after wind, like chasing wind. Like sometimes that image helps me with Ecclesiastes. Like, I mean, if you saw someone outside running after the wind, I mean, children do it, right? Like it's like the wind, there are these, but
This little image in my Bible. It's like chasing the
oh,
wind, and it's got the man chasing after. So yes, we'll
yeah,
blow that up and put it in the show notes.
I love that. Yeah, there's this sense of vanity if you see people running outside and be like, I'm just chasing the wind. Well, it blows here, it blows there. So chapter 2 ends with verse 26. For to the one who pleases him, God has given wisdom and knowledge and joy, but to the sinner, he has given the business of gathering and collecting, only to give one who pleases God, only to give to one who pleases God. So, I mean, he really gets at like whether someone's a sinner or righteous, there's the sense of we get glimpses in the text of like God is blessing the righteous, but also like same end is really what he gets at eventually. Like both are going to die, and if there is no afterlife, I mean, who's to say living wicked or something? He's like, I even tried this. I bought slaves. This also is vanity and is striving after wind. Chapter 3, for everything there is a season and a time for every matter under heaven, or every purpose under heaven, a time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant. So we see this, I think, these kind of what's the word I'm looking for? It's escaping me. A time to be born, a time to die. We see these like the word's escaping me, but these two opposite things juxtaposed together of a time to be born, a time to die, a time to seek, a time to lose, to keep, and cast away. And so this, you're right. These are when Ecclesiastes is quoted, Mary Balfour, as you have said, it's often here. It's this kind of poetic part. It's either in chapter 1, all is vanity, nothing new under the sun, or here, there's a time for these things, which is life, right? It goes back to what you said at the beginning about life isn't just filled with joy, or life isn't just filled with love or silent. There's a time for hate. Life isn't just filled with peace. There's a time for war. There's a time for weeping and laughing. And so much that like even our understanding in life, I would push in the way of a philosopher, that we can only appreciate what we consider good in light of knowing that there is an opposite, these opposites.
And I think this is why it's so important to read these chapters as a whole, because you get the bookmark of before chapter, that he's tried these things, life is vague. Then he goes into there's a time for,
Yes.
and if you keep going in 3, he starts talking about the injustices in the world. He talks,
Yes.
all the things that are hard, but we love to pull the things that make us, that we've talked about this before, the things we want to like needlepoint pin pillows and put them on our couch, the parts that feel good to us. And as you know, Alan and I are very committed to going through the parts that even feel hard, so I think it's important to really be a part of the whole process and not just pulling the things that make us feel happy, because
Yeah.
you'll read all of this, you'll only remember the verse 8 verses of chapter 3, and it's really set
Yes.
context, so
You're exactly right. The context, right? The sense of, as you're emphasizing, he has tried this. Kohelet has tried and saying, I did the things people have told me would bring me joy. I've tried to be fulfilled by life, yet I've discovered it's not. And I've discovered to the righteous and sinner, there is good and bad happening. And yet, unlike traditional wisdom, whether you are righteous, you don't just get prosperity and goodness and favor. And whether you are a sinner, you don't just get awful things and wickedness happening. You get some good in there too. And so in verse 9 of chapter 3, this is one of my favorite parts in the whole text, this section. What gain has the worker from his toil? I have seen the busyness that God has given to the children of man to be busy with. He has made everything beautiful in its time, although also he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. I perceive that there is nothing better for them to be joyful and to do good as long as they live. Also, that everyone should eat and drink and take pleasure in all his toil. This is God's gift to man. And so, this sense of like, interesting, like this idea of toil is showing up, and he's also mentioning that God has put eternity, the sense of olam in Hebrew, forever and forever, because eternity in a Christian's mind is different from what this eternity. It's this idea of forever and ever. It's a strong the strong meaning of this ongoing something distant, and something, one writer says, who is it? John Collins, the scholar, says, it's like primeval. It's like God has like put some of the earliest and some of the most distant things in our hearts, and yet we don't really know what God is doing. Like we don't really know why the sinners prosper at times and the righteous experience heartbreak and still have no long lasting thing from their toils. And so from dust to dust is the next section in the NRSV that starts in 16, and that section ends with, I want to highlight a part here that's a key part, 18. I said in my heart with regard to the children of man that God is testing them, that they may see that they themselves are but beasts. For what happens to the children of man and what happens to the beast is the same, whether one is animal or human. Kohelet's like, I'm not seeing that. They both die. They eat, they live in community, maybe they hunt, they die. And so as one dies, so dies the other. They all have the same breath, and man has no advantage over the beast. For all is vanity. It's all vapor. Man and beast, what's the advantage? All go to one place. All are from the dust, and to dust all return. Who knows whether the spirit of man goes upward and spirit of beast goes down to the earth? I saw that there is nothing better that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot. Who can bring to see what will be after him? Who can bring to see what will be after us? So Kohelet's saying, I tried it, I've seen it. There are these opposites, right? There are these like contrasts to life of embracing, a time to refrain, a time to cast stones and gather. And so he goes on to say at the opening of 4, again, I saw all the oppressions. This really sticks out to me as we move into 4, the sense of evil that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors, there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. And I thought that the dead who are already dead are more fortunate than the living who are still alive. But better than both is he who has not yet been and has not seen the evil deeds that are under the sun. There's nothing new. There is goodness, and yet evil and animal and beast both die. And here we are. Yeah, there's advice there in 4 to two are better than one, right? Often quoted in verse 9, 2 are better than one. And if one falls, has a fellow to pick him up, her up. A threefold cord is not easily broken. And yet we end chapter 4 saying, surely this is also vanity and a striving after wind.
Back to the wind.
Back to the wind. It's all chasing wind. It's all chasing. Even if you have someone there to strive with you and pick you up, he's saying, I've still tried it. Oppressions, not good. I just saw vanity under the sun. Fear God. Fear God. We're going to move into 5 as we wrap up here. Fear God. Don't want to go as deep because I want to make sure we get to 7 and get back to some poetry here. But I think what's interesting in 5 is that even like fearing God in the sense of wisdom and folly still brings about vanity. That even the wisdom is not, it might be esteemed, but it's not, what's the word? There isn't lasting just because someone is wise or just because someone has wealth. That's also what we're getting at. Wealth and wisdom, that it doesn't mean that because one has those things, possesses those things, that their end is better. They return to the dust, as we were told in chapter 4. Let's look at verse 5, verse 10. He who loves money will not be satisfied with money, nor he who loves wealth with his income. This also is vanity. When goods increase, they increase who eat them. And what advantage has the owner but to see them with his eyes? Sweet is the sleep of a laborer, whether he eats little or much. But the full stomach of the rich will not let him sleep. There is a grievous evil that I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt, and those riches were lost in a bad venture. Things still happening, life, riches, all of this. But where do we get at the end of chapter 5? We're still chasing wind. What does it say? Verse 16. This also is a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind, working for the wind? You're still striving for the wind. Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, and much vexation and sickness and anger. Wealth doesn't save one from the hardship of life. Wealth. We're going to keep moving. Mary Balfour, do you want to pause there? That was a lot.
So again, images. The first one is an image of a man sleeping. A working man at least can get a good night's sleep. And the other one is a rich man stays awake worrying. So it's got these little images that are there.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's helpful. Yeah, let's finish up 6 and 7, and then we'll get on. We'll go to next week after that.
Okay. Well, let's look at 6 here. Kohelet continues. Opens with chapter 6. There is an evil that I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. A man to whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing of all that he desires. Yet God does not give him power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. It is grievous evil. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that the days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial. I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. So we see this repetitive part at the end of 4, or middle of 4, where he's like, the dead are fortunate. And now he's getting at, those who are not born are fortunate. And he even like makes this jump to say those who are stillborn. He's really driving home in this cynical way that like this life can be wretched. He's talking about, I've seen oppressions, right? He's bought slaves. He's seen injustice. He's seen wealth that is supposed to bring people happiness and fulfillment, doesn't. And he sees that it leads to vanity and grievous evil. And so verse 7, a key part there of chapter 6, all the toil of man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. That's really the bottom line there of what we're getting at 5 and 6, right? I said wisdom earlier. I was thinking about moving to 7. We're talking about wealth. So I think about my 2 W's, wealth and wisdom, the things that are supposed to like make for a good life, especially for those who follow God. There were signs of blessings, right? In this context, like wealth was the sign that God had blessed, not just in Hebrew culture, but like in surrounding ancient Near East culture. Wealth was a sign of blessing from the gods. And so to push back and say that because one has wealth, like one who has wealth, appetite is not satisfied, and there is still grievous evil. One, because we could talk about even in our own nation, like there is lots of wealth, but doesn't mean that people are like good-hearted or righteous, right? Like the proliferation of lots of things in the world and capitalism in ways sometimes are built on the backs of people where grievous evil is happening. And
Absolutely.
and vanity. It's not like people are storing up treasures in heaven or saying like, even the things I'm going to have another jewel in my crown because I did this. Kohelet would say like, that's not really true. Um, let's look at 7. Let's move to the wisdom. So we have some wealth. We have animals, humans, or the beast are all the same. The end is the same. And now as 3, Mary Balfour, we talk about the contrast of like life happenings, key things of life and creation and movement. We now move to this contrast of wisdom and foolishness. Some key verses there of 7:1. A good name is better than precious ointment, and the day of death than the day of birth. Not as hopeful here. Verse 3, sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of face the heart is made glad. Verse
Yeah,
9, go
like these
ahead.
thoughts about life, right? So it's like bookend, about where
Yes.
patience is better than pride. Um, all of those. But then again, this very theme of chasing the wind. My life has been useless, but in it, I've seen everything. And so to me, it's. I think this is a good way to finish this episode. Is yes, there feels like a lot of unhope, no hope, and all of that. But I feel like there's a lot of like raw truth in this as well, always reminding us that we are
Yeah.
not to Jesus yet, but there's also a lot of raw truth. And when you're chasing that wind, you sometimes find that truth.
Yeah. You run into be like, this is like, is this what I'm living for? Is this what I'm saving for? A good way to end 7, verse 16. Be not overly righteous and do not make yourself too wise. Why should you destroy yourself? Be not overly wicked, neither be a fool. Why should you die before your time? It is good that you should take hold of this, and from that withhold not your hand. For the one who fears God shall come out from both of them. But it goes on to say, wisdom gives strength to the wise man more than 10 rulers who are in the city. Surely there is not a righteous man on the earth who does good and never sins. So the sense, like even the righteous can be sinful, and yet their end is still the same. And goes back to the kind of idea of forever and ever. In verse 24, that which has been is far off and deep, very deep. Who can find it out? I turned my heart to know and to search out and to seek wisdom and the scheme of things and to know the wickedness of folly and foolishness that is madness. And I find something more bitter than death, which we could spend all day on this next part. The woman whose heart is snares and nets and whose hands are fetters. Why was that a thing? Okay. He who pleases God escapes her, but the sinner is taken by her. Behold, this is what I have found, says the preacher, philosopher, while adding one thing to another to find the scheme of things, which my soul has sought repeatedly. But I have not found one man among 1,000. I have found but a woman among all these I have not found. Well, interesting here. See, this alone I found that God made man upright, but they have sought out many schemes. Interesting way to conclude here.
I've got to read how mine concretes. It's just a different
Yeah,
interpretation.
tell me.
This is all that I have learned. God made us plain and simple, but we have made ourselves very complicated.
Yes.
So I'm
Oh, that's so good.
going to stop us. Listeners, as
I like it.
always, we love you, but most importantly, God does. Come back next week for more with Alexis.
Thank you.